Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we continue finishing up Book 8, looking at Chapter 6 of Book 8 of Aristotle's Politics, dealing with his concerning education. Last chapter we dealt with music education. He's continuing this question on the role of education in music. So let's go look over here, Chapter 6. So let's continue. Let's go into it. But whether they themselves should learn through singing and playing instruments or not. Remember, he said to postpone the question: should they learn by doing it, or should they just watch others doing it? Right? Should therefore they learn by singing and playing instruments or not? And whether we raised earlier, which questions we raised earlier, must now be spoken of. It is not unclear that it doesn't that it does indeed make a great difference with a view to becoming a certain quality if one shares in the performance oneself. For it is impossible or difficult thing for them to become serious judges, excellent, spudaios, I think this is the spudaios, judges, without sharing in this way. In other words, until you know how it's done, you can't be a good judge. In other words, his argument is you need to learn how to do it in order to be able to judge it. That's an argument. You just can't watch it. Just if you don't know how it's done and how it's done, and you can only learn how it's done by engaging in it, and only by learning how it's done by engaging in it that you're able then to judge it finally or seriously. Seriously, this is Budios. Seriously, in a sense. At the same time, children should have some pursuit the rattle of Atlas. Now, this is an invention of the rattle preferably ascribed to Atlas, the Paragathian philosopher, right? This idea, which gave children so that they use this and not break anything around the house, should be supposed a beautiful thing, a fine thing. Anything young is incapable of keeping still. Right? Like young people, so therefore they did this thing and they did and the rattling sounds and that they become learners to do it. This, therefore, is fitting for children in infancy, while education is a rattle for the young when they're bigger. In other words, rattles are great when they're very young, but education is the rattle for for their bigger when they're bigger. Okay, so this is the even thing. This is the idea that this is therefore they need to do things. The young will need to do things, and this is and therefore having them do things in music and education by learning how to do it. This is how they learn. That there is to be an education in music in such a way that they will share in the performance, therefore, is evident from such things. What is appropriate and inappropriate in different ages is not difficult to define or resolve in response to those who assert that that concerning the vulgar ones. In other words, okay, different certain age, different what's appropriate and inappropriate, different ages is not difficult to solve. In response to those who assert that that the concern is a vulgar one. The concern of playing music is if you being an instrument and playing music is a vulgar one. In other words, this is not something that a free person should do. You shouldn't be playing. You shouldn't be a performer of instruments. This is a performer. This is an artisan. An artisan is not the activity of a free person. It's a vulgar thing. Um, in the first place, since one should take part in performing them for the sake of judging, we learn how to judge. On this account, they should engage in performing when they're young, and when they become older, leave it off. In other words, they do these things when they're young, but then when they're older, they don't continue doing it. They're able to, they learn it. They learn this that they learn to be able to judge it, right? Leave it off. And to be able to judge noble things, beautiful things, and to enjoy it in correct fashion through learning that occurred in their youth. In other words, they're able to know these beautiful and noble things because they learned about them. And they'd be able to judge them, to know what is good and what's not so good, because they learned how to judge them and how they did it by knowing how they're done, right? Concerning the criticisms of some that music make people vulgar, it is not difficult to resolve by investigating up to what point those who are being educated to political virtue should share in performing and which sort of tunes and rhythms they should share in, and particularly on what sort of instruments they are to learn. for it is likely that this too makes a difference. And therefore, in other words, for those being the concern of this education is a political education. It's not an education to make musical experts. So therefore, it's going to be designed that the education is going to be therefore the kind of tunes you learn, the kind of music is going to be geared towards this kind of specific education of a political life, a political learning, right? Therefore, these things, the kind of rhythms and the kind of instruments, these will make a difference. The resolution of the criticism lies in these things, for nothing prevents certain modes of music from producing certain the effects mentioned. And it is evident that the learning of it should neither be an impotent with a view of the latter activities, in other words, the activities of political life, nor make the body vulgar and useless with a view to military and political training. And with a view on the one hand to the uses now, and on the other to the sort of learning to be undertaken later. In other words, the education of the music that should be learned, the instruments that you should use, that you should be able to that it should be done for the understanding. It should not make the body vulgar. It should be or useless for military and political training, like otherwise. And with a view, on the other hand, to the high and not make them unable to learn other things afterwards, higher things, more important things afterwards. So, in other words, that the criticism lies here in the thing lies in the things for nothing prevents certain modes of music from producing the effects mentioned. In other words, learning should be done, and it should neither be an implement with a view to latter activities. In other words, it shouldn't the musical education should not limit the other things, nor should it make a body vulgar or useless. Okay, this would result in connection with the learning of music if they did not exist, did not exert themselves to learn either what contributes to contests involving professional expertise, or those works that are difficult or extraordinary, which have now come into contests from the contest into education, but learn such things as well as the other works of music, only up to a point where they're capable of enjoying noble tunes and rhythms, and not merely the common elements of music, as is the case even of some of the other animals, and further of the multitude of slaves and children. In other words, in other words, they need more than the pure simple music. They need to know the complicated. They need to know enough that they can not to be able to perform and create complicated things, but to be able to appreciate it, and therefore to know that what is good, to judge it, to appreciate it, and to know it, to get their minds open to these things, higher tones, and not just merely doing it at the lower level. In other words, they're expanding the mind, they're expanding the ability of judgment. The argument is, in other words, they're not learning it for the sake of being able to compose this professionally and compete, but rather they're expanding the mind and be able to judge complicated things more. It is clear from these things also which instruments are to be used. Flutes are not to be brought into education, so no flutes, nor any other instrument involving professional expertise, such as the lyre, or any of this of sort, but only those that will make them good listeners, either of music education or of the other sort of education. So these things like this. Further, the flute is an instrument involving not character, but rather frenzy. Flute is for frenzy, the argument is. And so it should be used with a view to those occasions when looking on has the power to purify rather than learning. Now this is interesting. This is purification, frenzy. The flute, the ethos, actually more akin to our oboe, right, was thought to be an instrument of stirring up frenzy, orgy, right, and inspiration and songs of impotence, for purification, catharsis, right. So this idea of catharsis, release. So this is the purgation of something rather than learning in that sense. So flute is for flutes. Now this is why oboe, right? Flute, oboe, right? Now let us add that the fact that the flute prevents speech also tells against its use in education. In other words, speech. The education should focus always on logi, okay, and speech. Therefore, you can't speak. So the music that they can speak. Hence, those of earlier times rightly rejected the use of it by the young and the free, although they had used it before. So they planned it for the young and the free. For when the For when they, the Greeks, came to have more leisure through being better off and were more magnanimous in regards to virtue and further, being full of high thoughts on account of their deeds both before and after the Persian War, they put their hand to every sort of learning, making no discrimination between them, but seeking to advance further in all. Right? After they got this, once they achieved something, right? They defeated the Persians. They had more time, they had more wealth, and they could do every kind of learning, right? And they thought they just learning for learning's sake. Hence, the expertise in flute was also brought in among the sort of learning, right? There was this idea of learning in this sense, and they make no discrimination between them that seeking the advocate to advance further of all. Hence, expertise in flute was also brought in among the sort of learning. So therefore, leisure and things brought this. Indeed, in Sparta, a certain choir leader himself played the flute for the chorus. And in Athens, it became so much the local fashion that most free people had a share in it. And this was clear at the tablet of Therapus, the chorus leader, set up at Exifata, 2038. The choir leader, the choreogogos, the producer of the dramatic performance, sometimes set up a votive tablet to Dionysus according to the victory of the poet whose laid had been produced. Epictetus was the earlier Athenian common poet. The tablet in question presumably recorded the flute player as well. Right? This idea that even after even then, later it was rejected as a result of the experience with it, when they were better able to judge what contributed to virtue and what does not. So in other words, just as they got wealth and leisure, everything became useful. And they became like they started even using it. It was used in choirs and people began. But then they started saying the effects of it, and they said, no, the effects was not necessary. They rejected it because of the experience with it. They were better able to judge what contributed to virtue and what does not. The same thing happened with many of the other ancient instruments, such as the pretis, the bratros, or those contributing to the pleasures of those who listen to their practitioners, the heptagon, the trion, the septuca, and those requiring professional knowledge. So here, Aristotle is talking about these are all stringed instruments, right? And therefore they require professional knowledge, right? The expertise, training, and therefore it's not just And the tale told by the ancients about the flute is a reasonable one. They assert that Athena, though she had invented the flute, threw it away. So therefore the idea is she invented it but then threw it away. This is the tale, right? Now it is not bad to assert that the goddess did this out of annoyance. It is not bad to assert that the goddess did this out of annoyance at the distortion of her face, but it is more likely that it was because education in flute playing has nothing to do with intelligence. Nous, 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 intelligence. For we ascribe to Athena intelligence and art, knowledge and art. In other words, Athena is dealing with knowledge and art. So therefore, it's not about she didn't throw away your face distortion, made her ugly, but rather because it didn't really help the nous. It didn't help her achieve nous in that sense, right? Since we reject professional education, both in instruments and performance, we regard as professional education that with a view to contests. For one who is active in this does not undertake it for the sake of his own virtue or excellence, arete, but for the sake of the pleasure of his listeners. In other words, competition to win. You want to win. You want to please the other person. You don't do it to you for you enjoying it. You're doing it for them, the listener, not for them. The artist is for the sake of the thing be enjoyed by others. That's vulgar. In other words, you're supposed to enjoy it. If it's not being done for your benefit and your enjoyment, this is the free person. The An art that is done for your sake versus the art that is done for the enjoyment of others. This is the difference. If the education and the art that should be done is music is done for the benefit of you, the pursuit as the educative sense, whereas the performer is doing it for the sake not of his own self, but of the listener, right? And that's competition. Hence, we judge, in other words, is not for his own virtue, but for the sake of his listeners. And this is a crude pleasure, right? The pleasure is not in itself; it's for others, right? And that's you get pleasure for helping others. That's crude pleasure, he said. Hence, we judge the performers not as belonging to free persons, but more characteristically of a laborer, Bas Benisoi. And this is why the artisans and craftsmen are not free people in a sense, right? Um, and in and indeed, the result is that they become vulgar, right? That they overly practice, they overthink. They become less free. They become more vulgar, banusai, the labor, like the physical labor, right? For the aim with for the aim with a view to which they create the end for themselves is a base one. In other words, the thing is what they don't wish to. They do it so that the spectator can do it. The spectator, being crude himself, customarily alters the music so that he makes the artisan engaging in it with a view to him of a certain qualities themselves, with respect to their bodies on account of their movement. So therefore, in other words, to keep them happy, you change the music. You change the music to keep them happy in their bodies and their things. So that's why this is what's crude about it. This is that you're a mechanic, you're an entity. You're not doing it you're not enjoying it for its own sake. You're enjoying it because you're giving others pleasure. Okay, you're not doing it because it gives you pleasure. It gives you enjoyment and rest. You're giving, or you're making money from it. Okay, you're doing it as an expert. You're an expertise, and this is the problem here in that sense. This is something vulgar in it. This is why he says there's something vulgar in it. Well, here we end the chapter 6. We end chapter 6. So if you have any comments or questions about this chapter, about music education and why it's done, why you need to learn it, and not why it's just watch it, and the limits to how you should watch it, and how you should do it, and how it should be exercised and learned, and that you put your comments or questions and things like this, and I will respond to them and do it. If you like it, please like it, and if you uh, uh, share it with social media, spread it out, show it to others. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. If you have subscribed, get others to subscribe. Let's grow the channel. If you've not liked, you didn't like it, say why in the notes. Maybe I can learn something. You can follow me in social media links below. Those who are interested. If you want to help contribute, there's 2 links below to Patreon and Subscribestar, which you can help contribute to what I'm doing here. If you want to, you understand. Another way you can help me is to go buy my book. You buy my book, Aristotle's a notebook to Aristotle's politics, a workbook. This is not a commentary. You can buy my other books as well, but this is not a commentary. This is a study guide workbook, like a Cliff's Notes, where it looks at politics as trying to understand it not only in terms of the whole, but also book by book, chapter by chapter, offering summaries, outlines, structures. It engages in the questions, and also in various points, but also connects those questions to larger questions in the history of political thought. It's aimed at not only it's useful for Wolf and students who are starting at introductory level and those even more advanced levels. So it's a very, I would argue, this is a very useful tool for anyone studying the politics. You can get it at all of the online bookstores, available in the online bookstores, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and things like that. But if you buy it directly through Lulu, I will get the profit that the bookstores get. So therefore, not only I'll get some money from the book if you buy it other places, but I'll get more. I'll get the profit that those those places get. But if you buy it by Lulu, now I understand Lulu doesn't. Lulu ships. Yeah. So buy it for yourself if you're doing it. Buy if you know a student who's studying it. Buy it for them. Please, this is a way that can help out there. I should have more people buying this than it is. I'm a little depressed that the sales are not doing that really well. Um, Given how many thousands of people studying. But it's like, okay, there's people say it's $30. It's kind of expensive. Why couldn't you give it $5? But that's because the cost of publishing, man. For $5, like a page would be useless. It'll be like about 10, 20 pages, and it'll be so vague and so bleh. This is a really serious, useful book that's not only useful for introduction students, it's also going to be useful to more serious students. It has lots of resources in it. So I hope people buy it. Well, with that, I'm finishing up this chapter. We finished chapter 6. Now we turn to chapter 7, which is it is the last chapter, maybe the penultimate chapter. Next time we go. Okay, so take care and have a good day. Bye bye.